Have you ever wondered if someone who always seems cold, superior, or completely unaffected is actually capable of crying when no one is around? It is a question many people ask. Can a narcissistic person truly feel emotional pain? The answer is yes. They do experience emotions, even though they often present themselves as the victim or behave as though they have been treated more unfairly than anyone else. The same emotional sensitivity that allows them to play that role so convincingly also makes them surprisingly easy to hurt. Their confidence may appear unshakable, but beneath the surface, their sense of self is often far more fragile than it seems. Small events that most people would brush off can deeply affect them. Some situations create only temporary discomfort, while others leave lasting wounds to the image they have built of themselves. If that emotional blow comes from someone whose opinion they secretly value or admire, the impact can feel overwhelming. Few things affect them more than having their pride challenged or losing the sense of control they work so hard to maintain. It does not matter whether the challenge happens in front of a crowd or during a private conversation. The emotional sting is often just as strong. Much of their suffering is created by the very behaviors they continue repeating. Constant dishonesty, pretending to be someone they are not, and carrying deep insecurity beneath a confident appearance all contribute to their inner struggle. None of those behaviors would create so much conflict if they did not also believe they should always appear untouchable. The moment that image feels threatened, they often become defensive and look for someone else to blame. Instead of sitting with their own discomfort, they try to place that emotional weight onto others. Stay with me, because the next part explains why this pattern is much easier to understand than it first appears. Today, conversations about narcissistic behavior are becoming more common, and many people now recognize it as something connected to deeper emotional struggles rather than simple arrogance. Even so, people with these patterns often depend heavily on the patience, understanding, and compassion of those around them while behaving in ways that seem completely inconsistent. They may say one thing while doing the exact opposite, expecting others to forgive them repeatedly because they believe they deserve another chance. Ironically, this also leaves them emotionally vulnerable. One of the quickest ways their feelings become hurt is through rejection or being left out. They struggle to accept honest feedback about their flaws because even gentle criticism can feel like a personal attack. Underneath the confidence they display is often a very sensitive self-image that reacts strongly to negative opinions. Many of them also fear loneliness because they rely heavily on attention, admiration, and validation from other people to maintain their confidence. Without a steady supply of praise, they often begin feeling emotionally unsettled. Once someone becomes deeply involved in this type of relationship, leaving it can be much harder than expected. Modern technology has made this even easier for them. Social media and constant online communication allow them to create carefully controlled versions of themselves that receive endless approval without requiring genuine closeness. Likes, compliments, and flattering comments can temporarily replace authentic connection, helping them maintain an idealized image while avoiding deeper emotional honesty. That digital attention often becomes enough to keep the fantasy alive for much longer than it otherwise would. One of the healthiest responses is refusing to provide constant emotional reactions that keep this cycle going. But don't leave yet, because the next point reveals one of the deepest fears hidden beneath the surface. Another fear that affects them profoundly is being exposed. Protecting their public image often becomes one of their highest priorities. They may tell repeated lies, exaggerate achievements, or carefully shape every detail of how they appear, because maintaining that image feels essential to their sense of identity. Much of their daily life becomes an ongoing performance designed to convince others that they are more successful, more admired, or more important than reality may suggest. When those carefully built appearances begin falling apart in front of other people, the emotional impact can be enormous. Watching the image they spent so much effort creating begin to crack is often one of the most painful experiences they can face. This is why building an independent, fulfilling, and emotionally healthy life for yourself is so important. The less your confidence depends on their approval, the less influence they have over your emotional well-being. The final point is one many people misunderstand. Insults and disrespect can affect them very deeply. Despite the way they sometimes treat others, they are usually very aware of the emotional impact words can have. They often recognize exactly how criticism, rejection, or humiliation feels because they experience those things intensely themselves. The difference is that instead of processing those emotions in healthy ways, they frequently respond with defensiveness, denial, anger, or attempts to regain control. Understanding this does not excuse harmful behavior, nor does it mean you should accept disrespect. It simply helps explain why certain reactions appear so strong. Real emotional strength comes from recognizing these patterns without becoming trapped inside them. Once you stop measuring your worth through someone else's approval and begin protecting your own peace, you regain something far more valuable than winning any argument. You regain control over your own life. And that is where lasting freedom truly begins. They usually understand exactly what they are doing when they use dishonest words, manipulation, or emotional tactics to hurt someone else. Yet the moment that same honesty is directed back toward them, everything changes. Even fair, respectful criticism can feel unbearable. Simply telling the truth about their behavior is often treated as if it were a personal attack. This happens far more often than many people realize. Any challenge to the image they have carefully created is experienced as an attack on who they believe they are. Over time, you may notice how unusually sensitive they become whenever someone questions them, points out a mistake, or refuses to support the version of reality they want others to believe. Beneath the confidence they display is often a deep layer of insecurity and anxiety that rarely gets shown to the outside world. They work very hard to hide their weaknesses because they fear what might happen if those hidden parts become visible. The more effort they put into protecting that image, the more painful it becomes whenever cracks begin to appear. Many of them also struggle to honestly examine their own actions or understand how their behavior affects the people around them. That lack of self-awareness makes meaningful change much more difficult. Looking closely at these patterns reveals something important. Behind manipulation, control, and carefully managed appearances is often a person who feels deeply uncertain inside. Understanding this does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain why certain reactions seem so extreme. Stay with me, because the next part reveals the response that often affects them more than anything else. One of the strongest responses you can make is not revenge, arguments, or proving them wrong. It is choosing to build a peaceful and fulfilling life without depending on their approval. Few things are more difficult for someone with strong narcissistic patterns than watching another person move forward, heal, and genuinely find happiness after leaving the relationship behind. That can awaken powerful feelings of jealousy because many of them struggle to create lasting inner satisfaction on their own. Even those who achieve financial success, recognition, or professional accomplishments often continue searching for more because external achievements rarely satisfy an emotional need that comes from much deeper within. Some even gain temporary satisfaction from seeing other people struggle because another person's pain briefly distracts them from their own inner emptiness. This is why they may create unnecessary conflict, encourage emotional drama, or keep people trapped in unhealthy cycles. Your emotional well-being, however, matters far more than their opinions, reactions, or attempts to pull you back into old patterns. They often recognize when someone is still hurting, holding on to resentment, or hoping for another chance to make things right. Those emotions can become openings they use to restart the same cycle. Protecting yourself sometimes means creating healthy distance, not only from the person causing harm, but also from those who constantly defend or enable that behavior. The more space you create, the more opportunity you give yourself to recover. Healing looks different for everyone because every experience leaves a different impact, but protecting your peace is always an important part of that process. Don't stop here because the final idea may be the one that changes everything. There are situations where complete distance is impossible. You may share responsibilities, family connections, or work environments that require occasional interaction. During those moments, emotional steadiness becomes one of your greatest strengths. Rather than becoming pulled into arguments or reacting to every attempt to provoke you, Remain calm, respectful, and focused on your own peace. Sometimes the most powerful response is refusing to feed unnecessary conflict. People who rely on control often struggle to understand someone who no longer reacts the way they expect. They may revisit old disagreements, reopen painful conversations, or test whether they still have influence over your emotions. They often assume that life without them has been difficult, and may even expect to see signs of regret or emotional struggle. When they realize you are no longer interested in repeating the same unhealthy cycle, much of that influence begins to disappear. Remaining trapped in anger, resentment, or thoughts of revenge only keeps you emotionally connected to the very situation you are trying to leave behind. Real healing requires something different. It asks you to gradually change the way you think, the way you respond, and the way you rebuild your life after difficult experiences. Strong boundaries, self-respect, and consistent emotional growth become the foundation for moving forward. Continue choosing courage, even when the process feels slow. As your confidence returns and your life becomes healthier, people who once relied on controlling you may react with disappointment, envy, or frustration. Those reactions belong to them, not to you. Your responsibility is not to manage their emotions, but to protect your own future. The greatest victory is not making someone else suffer. It is creating a life where peace, confidence, and genuine happiness no longer depend on anyone else's approval. Once you reach that place, you have already won the most important battle. Even if they appear happy for you on the surface, their private feelings may be far more complicated. Watching someone move forward after a painful relationship can stir up difficult emotions, especially if it reminds them of the damage their own behavior caused. When they see you healing, rebuilding your confidence, and creating a better life, it can be hard for them to accept that you no longer depend on them for your happiness. The brighter your confidence becomes after everything you experienced, the more uncomfortable that reality may feel to them. One of the strongest messages you can send is not through arguments or revenge, but by living your life without making them the center of it. When they realize they no longer hold the same influence over your emotions, it can be deeply frustrating for them, even if they never admit it. Around this stage, you may notice them trying to reconnect in small ways, testing whether the door is still open. That is why it is important to be cautious before allowing someone back into your life. Lasting change is shown through consistent actions over time, not through emotional promises or temporary displays of affection. Sometimes they may suddenly become unusually kind, romantic, or thoughtful in an attempt to rebuild the connection. These moments can make you question your decision, but it is important to look beyond isolated gestures and pay attention to long-term patterns. If the same unhealthy behaviors continue returning, temporary kindness does not create lasting safety. Remember, your value has never depended on whether another person recognizes it. Your growth, confidence, and emotional strength belong to you. Choosing peace after a difficult experience is one of the most meaningful forms of healing. Protect your inner calm, continue building the life you deserve, and never allow anyone to convince you that your progress should be sacrificed for old patterns. Stay with me because the next part explains one of the most common ways unhealthy relationships try to pull people back in. One behavior that often appears after distance has been created is commonly known as hoovering. It describes attempts to draw someone back into an unhealthy relationship after they have begun moving on. The name comes from the idea of pulling something back in after it has started moving away. These efforts usually happen when the other person senses they are losing influence or emotional control over the relationship. From their perspective, they may rewrite the story to protect their own self-image, convincing themselves that the relationship ended for reasons that avoid facing their own behavior. Many unhealthy relationships follow a similar pattern. They begin with intense charm, attention, and excitement, only to become increasingly difficult over time. Understanding those patterns can make it easier to recognize them before becoming trapped in the same cycle again. One of the earliest signs is acting as though nothing ever happened. After a period of silence, they may suddenly contact you with a cheerful message, a friendly phone call, or a warm memory from the past. The conversation often feels unusually sweet or nostalgic, encouraging you to forget everything that happened and simply continue where things left off. They might bring up happy memories, remind you of small routines you once shared, or send thoughtful gifts that seem completely unexpected. Rather than immediately focusing on the words themselves, pay attention to the overall pattern. Ask yourself whether genuine accountability has taken place or whether the past is simply being ignored. Real healing requires honesty, responsibility, and meaningful change. Pretending difficult experiences never happened may create temporary comfort, but it rarely creates lasting trust. Don't stop here, because the final point may help you recognize the difference between sincere change and repeated patterns. Another common behavior is offering apologies that sound convincing but are not supported by consistent action. Saying the right words is much easier than making lasting changes, and that distinction is extremely important. Before deciding to forgive someone or invite them back into your life, take time to observe whether their behavior has truly changed over an extended period. A meaningful apology is more than saying, "I'm sorry." It includes taking responsibility without making excuses, acknowledging the hurt that was caused, and showing through repeated actions that the same harmful patterns are no longer being repeated. Genuine growth takes time, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. If those qualities are missing, an apology alone may not be enough to rebuild trust. This does not mean people can never change, but real change is demonstrated through consistency rather than emotional promises. Your responsibility is not to rescue another person from their own choices. Your responsibility is to protect your emotional well-being, maintain healthy boundaries, and make decisions based on what is repeatedly shown rather than what is temporarily said. When you learn to recognize the difference between lasting transformation and short-term attempts to regain your attention, you begin making choices from confidence instead of confusion. That clarity allows you to move forward with greater peace, stronger boundaries, and a much deeper understanding of what a healthy relationship truly requires. There is often a quiet layer of dishonesty hidden beneath this kind of behavior. It is not always obvious, which is why it can be so effective. One way to understand whether the other person's intentions are genuine is to calmly change the direction of the conversation or respectfully question what they are saying. If they quickly become defensive, irritated, or angry, it may suggest that the apology was never truly about taking responsibility. Instead, it may have been another attempt to regain influence. People with strong narcissistic traits often place their own needs ahead of everyone else's, and they may continue using the same tactics for as long as those tactics produce results. That is why it is important to be careful with apologies that seem designed to create guilt rather than understanding. Genuine remorse usually leads to lasting changes in behavior, not simply emotional words. You are allowed to trust your own judgment and take the time you need before making any decision. Another common pattern involves overwhelming declarations of love and devotion. Intense affection may suddenly appear, especially after distance has been created. This is often called love bombing, where powerful emotional displays are used to quickly rebuild closeness. They may bring up meaningful memories, describe your relationship as something completely unique, or tell you they will never find another person like you. They often make those memories sound even more extraordinary than they really were, creating an emotional atmosphere that feels almost impossible to resist. Grand romantic words can temporarily lower your guard, but it is important to ask whether those words are supported by consistent actions. If every declaration of love is followed by the same unhealthy behavior, then the pattern deserves more attention than the promises. Stay with me, because the next signs reveal why actions always matter more than emotional speeches. Another pattern appears through promises that sound exciting but rarely become reality. Large commitments, dramatic future plans, expensive gifts, marriage proposals, or dreams of building a perfect life together may suddenly become part of the conversation. These promises often create hope and encourage you to believe that everything is finally changing. However, lasting trust cannot be built on promises alone. Healthy relationships grow through consistent actions over time, not through impressive words spoken during emotional moments. Many of these promises are designed to strengthen emotional dependence rather than create genuine stability. Remember that another person's empty promises are not your responsibility, and believing hopeful words does not make you foolish. It simply means you wanted to see the best in someone. Another common strategy appears when direct communication no longer works. Instead of contacting you directly, they may begin reaching out through people who are already close to you. Family members, mutual friends, or even children may suddenly become part of the conversation. They might speak kindly about you, send messages through others, or try to stay connected to your personal life in indirect ways. Sometimes these people are used to pass along compliments, apologies, or emotional messages in the hope that your boundaries will slowly weaken. This usually happens after direct attempts to reconnect have stopped working. Recognizing this pattern allows you to decide which boundaries are necessary to protect your peace. Don't stop here, because the next behaviors are often the most emotionally confusing. Another powerful tactic involves presenting themselves as the victim in order to awaken your sympathy. People who rely on manipulation often know that compassion is one of your greatest strengths. They may describe dramatic personal problems, create constant crises, exaggerate difficult situations, or even invent emergencies to pull your attention back toward them. Their emotional displays can feel convincing because they are designed to create urgency and make you feel responsible for helping them. In many cases, the real goal is not solving a problem, but restoring the attention they believe they have lost. Another behavior that sometimes follows is trying to influence how other people see the relationship. Rumors, half-truths, or carefully selected stories may be shared with friends, family members, or mutual acquaintances. The goal is often to reshape the narrative in a way that protects their public image while placing responsibility somewhere else. They may describe themselves as the misunderstood person while suggesting that you caused most of the problems. Over time, this can leave you questioning your own memories and wondering whether your experiences were as real as they felt. That confusion is exactly why staying grounded in your own reality is so important. Keep trusted people around you, protect your emotional well-being, and remember that lasting truth is revealed through consistent behavior rather than carefully crafted stories. The more clearly you recognize these patterns, the less power they have over your decisions. True healing begins when you stop chasing explanations and start choosing relationships built on honesty, accountability, respect, and emotional safety.